Order. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. In 2014, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates famously said that then Vice President Biden, he's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. Then 10 years later, in 2024, Secretary Gates lamented how the deterrent power of the United States
that used to be a bipartisan value that we all.
The Rules Committee will. I'll ask everyone to take their seats, and the Rules Committee will come to order. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. In 2014, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates famously said that then Vice President Biden, he's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. Then 10 years later, in 2024, Secretary Gates lamented how the deterrent power of the United States has declined in the last several years and concluded, "No one seems to be afraid of us." It doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that President Biden is the common denominator in this shocking turn of events. Indeed, his failed leadership has destabilized our geopolitical order and threatened our national security. From appeasing adversaries to opening the border, this president has eroded years of hard work in the name of a rather muddled worldview. House Republicans remain committed to shielding Americans from the worst consequences of this administration's warped priorities. This is why we are here today. The Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, State and Foreign Operations, all of those appropriations bills will recenter our priorities and improve our global and domestic postures and right-size the spending. I'd like to commend the Appropriations Committee for crafting legislation that responds to this administration's reckless approach while honoring the duty to the taxpayer. For decades, we all grew up on this. Peace through strength. It's served our country well. President Biden has abandoned that wisdom, and the state of the world today reflects the failure of that foreign policy. Everywhere you turn, our adversaries take advantage of the president's willingness to appease them. In 2021, the president removed the Houthis from the list of foreign terrorist organizations, only to watch them storm the United States Embassy. 9 months later, today they're harassing international shipping lanes and launching rockets at our troops and our allied partners in the region. And they're not the only adversaries he's appeased. In November of 2023, the Biden administration reissued sanctions waiver that gave Iran access to more than $10 billion. And then 5 months later, Tehran launched the largest combined military and drone assault ever against the country of Israel. The administration has emboldened bad actors. The world and our national security has suffered because of us. So H.R. 8774 reacts to the crisis we find ourselves in. It provides a total discretionary allocation of nearly $834 billion, funding critical programs from hypersonic research to shipbuilding. Whether it is countering active threats or deterring the machinations of China and Russia, this measure makes up much-needed headway. Additionally, the bill refocuses the Department of Defense on its core mission by defunding the Green New Deal budget and defunding DEI distractions. Our military should be laser-focused on prevailing in any conflict. They don't need Washington to force them to make these woke decisions along the way. Since President Biden entered office, he took over 60 executive actions that eroded border security. Time and time again, Republicans sounded the alarm on how destabilizing and dangerous these actions were for America's national security. For years, we weren't only ignored, we were derided for daring to question the wisdom of our border czar, the wisdom of dissolving our nation's borders. Predictably, admitting scores of illegal immigrants from across the globe has not made this country safer. You know, it's interesting to me that when someone presents themselves at the border, if they say, I've got a credible fear in my home country, then the asylum laws allow them into this country. When do American citizens get to say, I've got a credible fear of all these people you're letting in unvetted, that they may make my life more dangerous? In fact, as ICE and the FBI have discovered, they've allowed at least 8 individuals with ties to ISIS to infiltrate major American cities. We're on a knife's edge for the sake of a president's radical ideology. Beyond the serious threat of terrorism, American lives have been cut short by criminal illegal immigrants on this administration's watch. Jocelyn Dungary, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, Alex Wise Jr., Elizabeth Medina, Melissa Powell, Riordan Powell, and Travis Wolfe are just a few of the individuals whose lives were stolen by this crisis. Travis was just 12 years old when he was killed. No matter what other members may say, President Biden's open border policies certainly aren't making migrant crime less common. The Appropriations Committee crafted H.R. 8752 with this terrifying situation at the forefront of their minds. It makes a much-needed down payment to secure our southern border by providing $600 million for the construction of the southern border wall and prohibits the dismantling or removal of existing border barriers. The bill also ensures the removal of dangerous criminals from our nation by providing $4 billion for custody operations more than ever previously appropriated. There's also $822 million to fund transportation and removal operations for removable aliens. The president's open borders agenda must be contained before it is literally too late. And finally, the Rules Committee will consider the FY25 State and Foreign Operations and Related Programs Appropriations Act. This provides funding for operations, programs, and activities that support our national security and our interests while reducing overall spending. Our allies, as well as our adversaries, are much aware of the president's missteps. Within the bill, Israel receives $3.3 billion in foreign military financing to defend itself as it faces multiple threats to its continued existence. Additionally, countering the People's Republic of China, the Influence of PRC Fund is funded at $400 million, ensuring that strategic deterrence with China. I expect my friends and the ranking member will find that issues with these underlying measures, that's their prerogative. Indeed, it would be unusual for the ranking member to applaud the efforts of the majority in advancing their agenda to the floor. But I would like to offer 2 observations that I think most Americans are keenly aware of. First, the world has become much more dangerous than it was nearly 4 years ago. And 2, President Biden has been at the helm the entire time. House Republicans are doing our utmost to reverse the reckless impulses that have put us on this path and will keep Americans safe. The Appropriations Committee has done their work by providing the funding. I cannot find fault with that. I only look forward to the enlightening testimony from the committee, the Appropriations Committee, and the opportunity to advance this critical legislation that bolsters national security at this pivotal moment. So I would now like to yield to our ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you're right. We have a lot of issues with these bills that are before us, and it's not just our prerogative to remind the committee of these issues, but we think it's our obligation because what we do here is supposed to be important, and it reflects on our ability to lead in the world and to be viewed credibly. But when it comes to global leadership, we have a very different idea of what leadership looks like. After listening to your opening statement, I mean, we believe that Joe Biden has rebuilt America's standing in the world after Donald Trump ruined it, quite frankly. And it was Republicans, not Joe Biden, who held up aid to Ukraine for 9 months because their side buys into the Kremlin propaganda. It was a Republican president who went to North Korea, Mr. Chairman, who actually said after meeting with Kim Jong-un that we fell in love. Who says that? Donald Trump says that. It was a Republican president named Donald Trump who fawned over Vladimir Putin, who can't find enough superlative adjectives to praise people like Viktor Orban and every other dictator in the world. For one, I'm glad that we have a president right now who is trying to rebuild America's image around the world and who is standing up for democracy, which is something that used to be a bipartisan value that we all were committed to protecting democracy, not only here in the United States, but helping to promote it and protect it around the world. But we are here today to consider 3 more extreme MAGA funding bills for fiscal year 2025. H.R. 8752, the GOP's Department of Homeland Security appropriation bill, wastes billions of dollars on useless, ineffective border measures while disregarding present threats from terrorists, foreign adversaries, and violent extremists. We're going to hear a lot from our Republican colleagues about how this bill will secure the border, but it won't. And let's be real here. Republicans don't want to secure the border. They had a chance to do so with a bipartisan Senate border plan. They killed it because Trump said so. They're more interested in exploiting the border and creating chaos than actually doing anything to address problems at the border in a real and meaningful way. This is yet another wasted opportunity for them to address what they claim is their top concern. Next, we have H.R. 8771, the Department of State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill. It diminishes our country's leadership and totally isolates us on the world stage. The devastating cuts in this bill amount to an American retreat that shortchanges foreign assistance, harms our efforts to protect women, and deeply damages our ability to lead the global response to the climate crisis. And then we have H.R. 8774, Republicans' Department of Defense Appropriations Bill, filled yet again with a dumpster of culture war garbage. June is Pride Month, and as people across the country celebrate LGBTQ plus people, this MAGA Republican majority is using the appropriations process to promote hate and bigotry. And they're attacking women's rights 2 years nearly to the day since the Supreme Court ended the federal right to abortion, which unleashed abortion bans across the country and emboldened opponents of human rights around the world. And 40 years since the devastating global gag rule was first introduced to prevent NGOs from providing essential reproductive health education and access worldwide. It is shameful and it is wrong that Republicans are abusing the appropriations process to rip freedom away from Americans and try to control their lives. Enough already. Stop with the culture war nonsense and let's get to work on doing the business of the American people without all this extreme MAGA nonsense. None of these bills, none of them will be signed into law the way they are written right now. We all know that. This is not about serious legislating. This is about show business right now, performing for the most extreme right wing of the Republican base. And it is a waste of time. It is a waste of time. And I don't know what's wrong with you people, but all you seem to care about is attacking women's reproductive freedom and women's reproductive rights and beating up on the LGBTQ plus community. It is offensive. It is sick. We ought to be focused on serious matters of moving these important appropriations bills forward rather than wasting all of this time. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank our witnesses for being here, and I yield back my time.
I sincerely thank the gentleman for his comments. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome our first panel, Chairman Mark Amadei and Acting Ranking Member Lauren Underwood, Chairman Mario Diaz-Balart and Ranking Member Barbara Lee, Chairman Ken Calvert and Ranking Member Betty McCollum from the Committee on Appropriations. We'll start with Chairman Amadei. Where are you? And I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. I have lost a little weight, but not enough to fit in the palatial surroundings of your hearing room. So if you don't mind, I'll stand instead of doing the bowling pin thing. First of all, I know that everybody's familiar with
I'm not
the
sure that they can hear on the microphone.
And for the television.
television.
I mean,
Yeah, please sit down for the West Coast crowd.
Will the face make the radio? I don't Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. For your record, my name is Mark Amodei, representing Nevada's 2nd Congressional District, here to present the 2025 Homeland Bill. I know that the committee members and the staff are familiar with the contents of the bill from listening to both opening statements, so I won't regurgitate that and make my intro remarks crisp in order to free up as much time as possible if there are questions from the committee. The bill before us provides $64.8 billion for the Department of Homeland Security, an increase of $2.9 billion above the fiscal year 2024 level. In addition, it includes $22.7 billion for disaster response and recovery activities. It prioritizes investments that, in our view, make the border more secure and makes appropriate cuts into policies and programs we know do not work. Treating the border crisis as an issue that can be managed solely by providing grants to NGOs only further incentivizes legal immigration and does not work. Last year, we funded $1.7 billion for tents to process an unprecedented number of aliens that continue to cross between the ports of entry under this open border policy presently in effect. Has spending billions of taxpayer dollars for processing tents along the southern border just to release aliens into the interior at a rapid pace reduced illegal immigration at all? We think it's not working. So we eliminated that funding in this bill. And for shelter services grants, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in places like New York City, Chicago, and D.C. to pay for transportation, hotels, and other services for migrants. Those very mayors of those cities have declared the migrant influx untenable. Does giving additional services and transportation money to nonprofits to reduce encounters or deter anyone from crossing illegally? Again, I think the answer is a resounding no. And by the way, this administration gleefully terminated every preceding administration's border-related executive order the minute they took office. This is why this bill invests in tried and true methods of securing the border that the men and women in the field are asking for. More agents, more detention beds, which, by the way, was in the Senate bipartisan bill that's already been mentioned, better technology, and physical barriers. The bill makes the following specific border security investments: sustains funding for 22,000 Border Patrol agents, $300 million for border security technology, a record level in that department. That includes autonomous surveillance towers, mobile surveillance platforms, counter-tunnel equipment, and a significant investment in counter-drone capability. $600 million for the border wall because we know physical barriers work at those high-traffic areas. And finally, $305 million in non-invasive inspection equipment and upgrades so that we can detect fentanyl at our ports of entry. In addition to our efforts at the border, the bill includes funding for critical immigration enforcement efforts, such as $3.1 billion to support the 50,000 detention beds. That's 8,500 more beds than were funded in the last cycle and 16,000 more than the administration requested. $822.7 million for flights and ground transportation for ICE to execute its statutory authority to remove more than 1.3 million migrants who are still in this country despite having final orders of removal. And $60 million to hire 250 new law enforcement officers to investigate international criminal activity and keep our community safe. That translates to fentanyl. The bill also makes critical investments outside the border. TSA, we provide $178 million to speed up the computed tomography screening device efforts at our nation's airport. Nearly double the requested amount so our traveling public will be safer. That's new technology in the screening process that allows them to have a better look. The present time that it was going to take to roll that out would have been such that by the time it was fully rolled out, there would be undoubtedly new technology available. Let's get it done now. Give those folks the benefit of that doubt. You mentioned China, Mr. Chairman. As China continues to grow its military, economic, and political influence in the Indo-Pacific, the U.S. must have a persistence and a presence in the region. The bill expands Coast Guard in the Indo-Pacific region, which may be news to some people, but they have a significant mission. This bill includes funding for 4 fast response cutters, new ones, $60 million to extend the service lives for medium endurance cutter, and $4.2 million for increased maritime engagements to expand partnership and exercise the nation's bilateral and multilateral agreements in the Indo-Pacific. The bill funds the core responsibilities of the department that protects the homeland. I yield back.
Thank you for your testimony. Representative Underwood, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member McGovern, for having me here today. I want to start by acknowledging the hard work of those who are serving on the front lines at the Department of Homeland Security. They are making sacrifices every day to protect our country, and I'm committed to recognizing that. Many of the policies I push to have included in the bill acknowledge both the challenges and obstacles these men and women face. For example, today's bill includes key priorities that focus on expanding employee wellness and suicide prevention programs, including funding additional wellness centers that build upon the successes of the El Paso pilot, providing resources to increase accountability at the Coast Guard as we work to protect cadets from sexual harassment and assault, and improving access to contraceptives for Coast Guard service members and their families. However, despite these silver linings, the fiscal year 2025 Homeland Security Appropriations bill put forward by Republicans falls short of addressing our country's real and urgent needs. The legislation not only increases funding for inhumane, costly, and ineffective responses to the humanitarian crisis at our border, it cuts $2.1 billion to border security operations, including the complete elimination of the Shelter and Services Program and the critical resources our U.S. Border Patrol agents need to secure the border. Let me be clear, eliminating the Shelter and Services Program will not stop migration. It will only prevent communities from managing surges humanely and safely, ensuring chaos and desperation across our country. The bill also guts funding for refugee and asylum programs and even includes a provision that would cut over $300 million in fee funding for the asylum program. The proposed cuts to the asylum program would only further overwhelm our broken immigration system and ensure that more people are released from DHS custody without legal status. That outcome is not good for anyone. The funding choices made by the majority in this bill will result in more people being released into the interior while they likely wait for years for their case to be decided. And the disappointing truth is that this bill doubles down on outdated, ineffective border security strategies that ignore reality and will waste billions in taxpayer dollars. These ineffective policies will leave our communities exposed to humanitarian crises without the resources necessary to respond. With this bill, House Republicans are turning their back on U.S. Border Patrol agents and the critical funds they need to maintain safe and humane facilities. But the failures of this bill continue. This bill also underfunds critical cyber defense programs, leaving Americans vulnerable and unprepared to deal with cyber threats at a time when our schools and our hospitals and critical infrastructure are under constant attack. And in the face of threats of terrorism and violent extremism that have been highlighted by both the prior and current administrations, this bill eliminates funding for the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, also known as CP3. It eliminates funding for the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program. It cuts funding for the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office, and it includes statutory restrictions that would prevent the department from taking the important actions needed to reverse the alarming trends we see on violent extremism and terrorism. If passed as written, this bill would leave our communities with nothing to address some of the most urgent threats we are facing across the United States. This legislation reflects a missed opportunity to work in a bipartisan manner to prioritize the needs of our nation, responding to existing and emerging threats, and address the concerns Americans have expressed about our immigration system, national security, climate change, and more. The challenges our country faces cannot be understated. We are living in unprecedented times, and the American people are looking for Congress to set aside partisan politics and do the right thing. Unfortunately, this bill misses the mark and ignores our country's most pressing needs, and that's why I cannot support it in its current form. And earlier this week, President Biden issued a statement confirming that he would veto this bill if presented with it. We must do better and work collaboratively on a bill that would meet the real and urgent needs of our nation. In its current state, this bill does not do that. In the coming months, I look forward to working with my colleagues to produce a bipartisan bill that puts people over politics and funds the priorities that will keep our country safe, healthy, and prepared to face our challenges with resolve. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The gentleman from Florida, the Chairman Diaz-Balart, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. My voice is a little bit gone. I hope it'll last throughout this presentation. Mr. Chairman and the Ranking Member McGovern and the members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the fiscal year 2025 Department of State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Appropriations Bill. The bill before us today will allow us to build on the important changes that the House Republicans fought to secure in the fiscal year 24 bill signed into law, frankly, just a few months ago. This starts with further reductions to the top line. The State Foreign Operations Bill before you represents an 11% cut from fiscal year 2024 enacted. That bill, by the way, was a 6% cut from the year before. Now, you've heard it already that some will say that cuts of that magnitude will jeopardize the United States leadership in the world and make us less safe. I completely disagree. In fact, it's just the opposite, Mr. Chairman. The priorities in this bill are really simple and straightforward. If you are a friend or an ally of the United States, this bill supports you. But if you are an adversary or are cozying up to our adversaries, then frankly, you're just not going to like this bill. The bill eliminates controversial or ineffective programs that American taxpayers do not support, and that frankly, even our allies and partners don't support either. Yet, even with such a top-line reduction, the bill fully funds the U.S.-Israel Memorandum of Understanding, increasing funding to counter Communist China, even above the President's request, and continues critical security assistance to Taiwan and other allies and partners. But let me tell you what this bill does not fund, Mr. Chairman. So despite the Biden administration's request, this bill will not fund organizations that employ terrorists, like UNRWA, provide a platform or that provide a platform on the global stage to the worst human rights abusers, like the UN Human Rights Council, or take bogus legal actions against Israel as it fights for its very existence, like the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, or that cower to Communist China and deny Taiwan even observer status, like the World Health Organization. Bill does not pay other countries for their climate reparations, like the Loss and Damage Fund, for example, or this bill does not fund groups that promote and mobilize migration caravans to the United States southern border, like many of the organizations that do so today. So again, thanks to this administration, we have this open border, and we should not be paying to help facilitate illegal migration. Now, I'd like to take a moment to address the United Nations. It's obviously a big deal. This bill acknowledges, frankly, the mockery that is the UN and zeroes out the UN regular budget. Let's be clear. The hypocrisy and the moral decay at the UN has only gotten worse, and it reared its ugly head. It does, frankly, rear its ugly head time and time again with repeated and brazen anti-Semitic attacks against Israel. That is why this bill building on a key win from the fiscal year 24 law and adds new conditions on anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias throughout the United Nations and other international organizations. You see, the taxpayers will not be on the hook for this unacceptable behavior. The bill continues to prioritize countering the Chinese Communist Party and their malign and destabilizing actions around the world, providing $2.1 billion, which is above the President's request, as I mentioned, for that. It also provides $500 million in foreign military assistance for Taiwan's security needs, Mr. Chairman, and prioritize funding for other partners in the Indo-Pacific, including the Philippines and the Pacific Island countries. Now let me turn to our Western Hemisphere, which is another priority in this bill impacting all Americans. Funding will combat the trafficking of opioids and in particular fentanyl. The bill also holds accountable governments failing to cooperate on counter-narcotics and other issues of critical importance to the United States. For example, no funds, not $1, go to Mexico until a certification is made that an agreement is in place to restore water deliveries owed, I repeat, to the United States from Mexico. This bill reins in wasteful and boondoggle spending on dubious climate change objectives, including prohibiting funds for the Green Climate Fund and the Clean Technology Fund. The bill prioritizes key functions of the State Department, like safety and security of our diplomats and our embassies abroad, while slashing wasteful bureaucracy across the department. Nobody can tell me that there isn't wasteful bureaucracy across that department. In particular, the bill eliminates funding for special envoys and special representatives that are not authorized in law or not state-confirmed. Again, if they are that important, then let's just have them authorized or have them Senate confirmed. Is that too much to ask? And finally, just as important, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, this bill includes all longstanding pro-life protections, which includes a prohibition on all taxpayer funds from being used to pay for abortion, and builds on those requirements by applying the Protecting the Life of Global Health Assistance policy to all global health funding. So again, it promotes American values by continuing important funding for democracy, increasing funding for religious freedom programs abroad, supporting faith-based organizations that are helping to deliver the United States foreign policy assistance, and eliminating programs that use taxpayer dollars for, frankly, controversial agendas. So, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, again, thank you for holding this hearing, and I look forward to your questions. I yield back.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Ranking Member Lee, you're recognized for your statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member, Mr. Members of the committee. Thank you very much for giving us a chance to be here. Is this on? I think it is now. Okay, first, believe it or not, I'm going to thank our chair for his friendship. We do disagree on each and every issue, but I want to thank him for respecting my point of view and our points of view on our side. Needless to say, I oppose the Republican fiscal 25 state and foreign operations appropriations bill as drafted. This is a deeply political extremist bill that seeks to satisfy the most radical members of Congress at the expense of our national security, global human rights, and the well-being of our allies. Now, let me remind you that currently we spend less than 0.5% of our GNP overseas with foreign assistance. This means that current spending is 50% less in real terms than, spent on diplomacy and development than during the Cold War. I must note that our House debate on this particular bill will be carefully watched by people around the world. I urge this committee to reject the floor amendments that would further cause America's friends and foes to question America's strength or resolve to tackle the biggest global issues of our day. This woefully underfunded bill revives many of the bad ideas of last year's House bill, and then it doubled down on some new ones. First and most dangerously, this bill imposes cuts to our diplomatic, development, and humanitarian programs that will weaken America and leave us very vulnerable. The measures Republicans are bringing to the House floor this week would slash our diplomatic and development programs by a shocking 12%, while at the same time seeking to increase military spending by $8.5 billion. These cuts would leave America vastly weakened and continue a dangerous trend that puts the Pentagon on steroids while leaving diplomacy and development on life support. Now, I just returned from a bipartisan delegation to Africa, where my colleagues and I, Democrats and Republicans, met with reformers in key African democracies. These leaders told us they preferred to partner with the United States over China, but too often America's presence and investments was missing in action. Countering the PRC's influence means plainly and simply showing up. Republicans can't have it both ways. This bill encourages China, Russia, and all of our adversaries to fill the void that this bill, with a 12% cut, yes, last year a 6% cut, will accomplish, and it is accomplishing that. So you can't have it both ways. This bill also takes a dishonest approach to the existential threat posed by climate change. People around the world are confronting the impacts of human-caused climate change right now. Life-threatening temperatures, crop failures, floods, and severe weather. Many of us are experiencing this in our own districts and hometowns. We can't change the temperature. Climate change is here. The past 12 months have been the hottest ever measured. But we can help people in communities around the world to cope with the most life-threatening impacts. This bill leaves us without the tools to respond to this threat. The bill also wages war on women's reproductive freedom. 218 million women still do not have access to the tools needed to decide when and how to have a baby. And hundreds of thousands die in childbirth. That is a fact. This bill makes it harder for women to access care. It also cuts off funding to UNFPA, the one partner that provides services to mothers and their babies in the hardest places to reach. But one of the most damaging aspects of this bill is the massive abdication and retreat of United States leadership around the world. The bill projects a worldview that sees issues and countries as black and white, good and evil. If we don't like everything about an organization or can't control all of their actions, this bill prohibits funding it. It's our way or the highway. This is fundamentally undemocratic for a country that stands for democracy. Perhaps most telling is the largest increase in this bill is foreign military financing. While zeroing out the United Nations and outright prohibiting a half dozen UN bodies from being funded, the message of this bill is more weapons, less cooperation. But members, Mr. Chairman, and our ranking member, this is not how the world is. It's not how it works. This approach is isolating America. Yes, human rights violators in countries that do not share our values, they also participate in these organizations. But that is why we must stay engaged, not walk away. If we cede the ground to countries with little regard for human rights, we are enabling more injustice. The world is full of threats that don't respect borders, from climate change to pandemics to assertive dictators. We can't stick our head in the sand and hope it will go away. Let me take a moment to thank our diplomats, our Peace Corps volunteers, our Foreign Service staff, our security, our support staff, all of those who are supported. They're supported by this bill. They continue to make great sacrifices on behalf of the United States, and we are deeply grateful. Again, the world will be paying attention to our floor debate. Our allies are asking if we are serious about protecting human rights and dignity, or if we intend on building a wall around America and telling our allies to go at it alone. I urge this committee to reject these amendments and debates that will further isolate and weaken America in the eyes of both our friends and adversaries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Ranking Member Lee. Thank you for your testimony. Chairman Calvert, you're recognized for your statement.
Thank you, Chairman Burgess and Ranking Member McGovern. I'm sure your former Chairman, Mr. Cole, is watching this debate. He had a good week last week. Congratulations to the Chairman. We wish him well. This fiscal year 2025 Defense Appropriation Bill provides $833 billion for the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. Consistent with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, this is $8.5 billion or 1% above the fiscal year 24 enacted level. While $833 billion is the discretionary cap, the subcommittee has little discretion over 62% of the bill. The funding goes toward must-pay bills, including troop and civilian pay, military benefits, medical care and family services, sustainment of current weapon systems, fuel, utilities, IT, basic supplies, and certainly training and education. This is to say nothing of necessary investments in major weapon systems to keep our military dominant in an intensifying threat environment. This combination leads me to the conclusion that defense allocation under FRA is too low. I know that will be a shock to some people, but I believe it's too low for today's needs. That said, FRA is the law of the land. To provide a capable, lethal, and readily usable military within these fiscal constraints, the Defense Subcommittee scrutinized the fiscal year 25 budget requests line by line, held numerous bipartisan engagements with senior Department of Defense officials, and conducted rigorous oversight, resulting in roughly $18 billion in cuts. Many of these cuts are due to schedule delays, unjustified cost increases, under execution, or other programmatic adjustments. In many cases, the department simply did not provide clear and adequate justification, and we're not going to give any blank checks. Turning to the details, the bill continues the investments made in fiscal year 24 by prioritizing funding for the fight against China, promoting innovation and the modernization of our military, supporting our service members and their families, optimizing the Pentagon's civilian workforce, enhancing the department's role in countering the flow of illicit fentanyl and synthetic opioids, supporting America's close ally Israel, and ensuring the department is focused on its core mission of training and equipping our warfighters. The only way to prevent Chinese aggression is by fielding and operating capability that demonstrates American military advantages. President Xi is planning to invade Taiwan potentially by 2027, maybe sooner. The United States must be ready. This bill increases investments in fifth and sixth generation aircraft, procures deliverable capability, including several Indo-PACOM unfunded priorities. It prohibits the divestment of certain naval and air assets that are still combat credible. And it provides $200 million for Taiwan security cooperation programs while prioritizing defense articles and services to the threatened island. The bill continues to invest in the reawakening of American defense innovation. To understand this imperative, we must think back to 1993, when then Secretary of Defense Les Aspin hosted the defense contractor version of the Last Supper. He had a simple message to the 24 defense prime contractors present. One word: consolidate. 31 years later, the consequences of this decision mandate action. As evidenced by endless reporting, our defense industrial base is very fragile and competition is stifled. Almost every major defense acquisition program is plagued by constant issues: persistent inflation, aging workforce, costly infrastructure, weak supply chain, overly optimistic schedules, unrealistic budgets, and overpromised results. To procure modern capability on an accelerated timeline, this year's bill once again provides significant investment in innovation and modernization. The bill reflects the requirement to leverage the innovation community and American entrepreneurs to rise to the occasion. The bill also maintains high levels of funding for the department's drug interdiction and counter-drug activity, adding $242 million above the President's request and increasing funding for the National Guard counter-drug program and the National Guard Youth Challenge program to empower states to take a more active role in the defense of their community. The bill also transfers Mexico from NORTHCOM to SOUTHCOM for improved coordination and prioritization. As I mentioned at the outset, this bill focuses the department on its warfighting mission. The bill includes a number of general provisions carried in the House Fiscal Year 24 bill that send this clear message to the department by pivoting it away from the culture wars. Finally, underpinning these priorities is the imperative to support our service members and their families. The bill includes a 4.5% pay raise for all military personnel, includes $2.5 billion toward an additional 15% pay raise for junior enlisted service members. This will have a significant positive impact on the recruitment and retention and will improve the quality of life for our service members and their families. Before I close, I'd like to comment on the number of amendments that have been submitted. This year, over 400 amendments have been filed, valued at about $6.4 billion. That's just shy of 1% increase allocated for the defense this year under the FRA. I support an open and transparent process, and I support the intent of many of the funding amendments. However, I'm concerned that the sheer volume of amendments, coupled with a tight top line, complicates our efforts to produce a bill that provides the resources necessary to deter and, if necessary, win a war. In short, this bill procures where we can, trains where we must, and invests in capability that will make our adversaries wake up every day and say, today is not the day to provoke the United States of America. I look forward to working with all of you and to achieve that end. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back, and my good friend, the ranking member, has her statement.
Yes, Ranking Member McCollum, you're recognized for your statement.
Thank you, Chairman, and to Ranking Member McGovern, and to those of you on the committee, Mr. Norman, that I have my back to, apologize, but you can see that we are tight around the table. The fiscal year 2025 Defense Appropriation Act totals $833 billion, and that's slightly over President Biden's budget request. And I truly appreciate that this bill conforms to the Fiscal Responsibility Act. However, I do have concerns with this bill and how it will impact our military readiness and unit cohesion. Like the past generations who fought for the ideals espoused in our Constitution, we need to foster a climate in our military that appreciates and supports all Americans who take that oath to serve. Unfortunately, at this time, this bill does not reflect that sentiment. Fiscal year 2025 Department of Defense Appropriations Bill presented to us today repeats some of the same mistakes as the FY24 House bill proposal. Once again, this bill includes partisan social riders that were just rejected in the FY24 conference agreement. And the inclusion of those riders in the process last year led to several continuing resolutions that spanned over 5 months of this fiscal year. And our national security cannot afford to wait another 5 months as we previously did. Once again, this bill limits the ability of service personnel and their families to receive the reproductive health care they deserve. I would remind my colleagues that women make up almost 20% of the military services, and approximately 800,000 women, service women, live in a state that has banned or limited access to reproductive health care. None of those women can choose where they serve, where they are stationed. I have an amendment that I submitted to the committee that would strike this rider, and I urge the Rules Committee to make it in order so that our service members and their families get the health care that they deserve. Once again, there are offensive provisions that disenfranchise lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender service members. Rather than making our military a welcoming place and an inclusive place for all those who want to serve our country. Yet again, these provisions are included in the bill, and they needlessly attack diversity and inclusion efforts at the department. Our military is the only institution in our country that most broadly reflects the American population. We know that the services have been facing recruiting challenges, but we did hear recently from the Army and the Navy this year that they're seeing improvements in the recruiting numbers, and I congratulate them for that. So why would we, with good conscience, want to include provisions that might dissuade any American, regardless of their background, from taking the oath of service, of offering to put their life on the line for all of us? Beyond the social policies, there's other elements in this bill that I cannot support. First, the bill continues to treat climate change as if it's not happening, and that it's not a national security threat. And we know for a fact that it is. We've seen the impact of severe weather events on installations year after year. Just look at Guam as a recent example. Over $50 billion in repairs will be needed for the installation of Guam, which were damaged by a typhoon last year. With all the military construction and funding going into Guam, the evidence of infrastructure vulnerability on that island is even more clear. Cutting climate programs hards resiliency and we will pay for it as taxpayers on the back end. Second, the bill cuts funding for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. I recently, along with Congresswoman Lee, met with President Zelensky, and he expressed how grateful the Ukrainian people were that the United States had finally delivered on additional ammunition funding to help Ukraine repel Putin's illegal invasion. This bill should have included long-term assistance that Ukraine needs, and that funding has been in the bill. The long-term assistance has been in the bill since 2016. This funding signals that the West stands with them in their fight for their own self-determination. And it's assistance that will continue to enhance Ukraine's military ability to work with NATO forces. Failure to continue this funding, which has long been standing, bipartisan initiatives to support Ukraine, to cut it sends a terrible signal. And I believe it will only embolden Putin. And why in heaven's name would any of us want to give Putin any kind of advantage? And third, this bill limits the ability for our government to address disinformation. Our foreign adversaries use social media to spread disinformation here at home in the United States. This bill deprives the department of their responsibility to set the facts straight. And this is dangerous and would have real national security implications here at home and abroad. Every member in this room knows what needs to happen for this bill to become law. The partisan writers need to come out so that the bill can get bipartisan support. And it was deeply unfortunate that we had to waste half of fiscal year 2024 to learn that lesson. But you have my commitment to work with the chair to once again find a bipartisan solution to make sure that our service members have what they need to do their job and return home safely and protect the greatest democracy on the planet. With that, I yield back.
Chair, thanks, Agenda Lady. I want to thank all of our witnesses for your testimony today and the significant amount of work that you've put into these bills. And it is, as been pointed out by several of you, it is important that these bills be delivered in a timely fashion. And we're working through that process today to get them to the floor. And I hope that we're successful in doing that. Mr. Calvert, you brought up about the number of submissions that you received from members. You had a pretty high number there, but I suspect there's even more than that. You were requests that you were able to work into the base bill as you were working this process through your subcommittee?
Mr. Chairman, we had about 10,000 requests for the appropriation bill in general. We worked through those. We were able to take care of a substantial number of those, working with the minority to make sure that members of Congress areas and their interests were well represented within the bill. So that's a good thing. It's just that it seems that whether you're in the majority or the minority, the go-to offset is the O&M accounts, operation and maintenance accounts to the Department of Defense, which we need to operate the department and to maintain the equipment that we have. And so most of the money that's being offset is for those accounts, which obviously would gut that O&M account significantly. So that's the reason I bring that up, is that we try to, certainly we have a significant amount of funds that we're responsible for, but with a 6% inflation rate and a 1% increase, we have had to reduce the department approximately 5%. And generally, I made cuts of about $18 billion, which made some members unhappy, but that's the thing we had to do in order to meet our requirement under the FRA.
You brought up consolidation and recognizing that's not something you can fix in a single year's appropriations bills, but what are some of the things that we can look for as evidence that you're beginning to turn the tide a little bit on the consolidation?
Well, as you know, we only have 5 primes today, and we've had some difficulties with some of the major programs. One that comes to mind that I probably shouldn't bring up, but I will, the submarine program, which I know some of my colleagues on both sides have talked to me about, specifically the Virginia-class submarine, which I'm in favor of. I'm in favor, obviously, of the department moving to a 2+1. That means 2 Virginia-class submarines and the submarine to replace the Ohio-class submarine. Unfortunately, our industrial base, since the failure of the Soviet Union, has diminished significantly. We've closed a number of shipyards, and we do not have the industrial base or the supply chain at this moment to build 2 Virginia-class submarines. So what we're directing significant resources to in the next few years, over $10 billion, is to rebuild the industrial base for the submarine program, where we can get to 2, potentially up to 3 Virginia-class submarines per year, working with our allies in Great Britain and Australia under the AUKUS program to make sure that we meet that requirement. Unfortunately, as we speak today, we do not have that industrial base. But that's, by the way, across the enterprise, whether it's fighter planes, whether it's submarines, whether it's ships, and you name it. We've had some difficulties meeting what needs to be supplied to make sure that our military has the best equipment and the best supplies, and if we do go to war, that we win and they lose.
Thank you. Chairman Dinsborough, let me ask you the same question about the number of member submissions that you received in working through your bill.
Mr. Chairman, we don't have member requests in our bill. However, as you know, this bill is mostly policy, right? So we worked with every member, including very closely with the Foreign Affairs Committee, the members there, but we worked with every member of the Appropriations Committee and outside the Appropriations Committee to try to reflect their concerns and their priorities.
So you attempted to make this a very inclusive product?
Very much so, very much so. Yes, sir.
Chairman Amadei, let me just ask you the same on Homeland Security. Can you kind of give me an idea of how many member submissions that you received during the process of your markup?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a two-part thing. There were ones that were received from committee members on both sides of the aisle before the full committee markup. We ended up including many of those in the manager's amendment. We had 16 or 17 that were debated in front of the full committee, and some were accepted on both sides of the aisle, and some were rejected. For this bill, we had about 4,000 member requests, but we've got a group that we're working on for en bloc, and rough figures about 39-ish that we, depending on what you folks do, will be prepared to address on the floor.
Well, I want to thank all of you. It is a tremendous amount of work. I mean, I also need to thank the rules staff. They've put in a tremendous amount of work going through the amendments this past several days. It is important that we do our work and that we get these bills delivered to the country before the end of the fiscal year. So I thank you for your participation, help in getting it done. And Mr. Ranking Member, I'll yield to you for any questions you may have.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's the point of asking questions at this point? I mean, these bills, as I said at the outset, are not going to be signed into law. They've been loaded up with all kinds of culture war matters that don't belong in these bills. And it really is quite disappointing to see how dysfunctional we've become. I began my career as an intern up here. I've worked as a staffer and served as a member of Congress now for many years, and I remember when the appropriations process was truly bipartisan, when regularly, when the House would bring an appropriation bill to the floor, there'd be large bipartisan votes. That's not where we are right now. And any attempt at trying to be bipartisanship, then come to the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee will screw it all up so that it is partisan. We had an NDAA bill that passed out of committee 57-1. I mean, people, Democrats and Republicans, 57-1. You can't get Democrats and Republicans to agree on lunch, but they agreed on moving that bill forward. It comes to the Rules Committee, goes to the floor, and it becomes this totally partisan vehicle. So, I mean, bipartisan.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yeah, happy to.
Did it pass on the floor, the NDAA?
Yeah, it did, yeah. Well, but so but that bill is not, that bill as it is not going to look like it is if it ever sees the light of day. but there's no attempt at bipartisanship. And this obsession that my Republican friends have with attacking women's reproductive health care and going after the LGBTQ plus community, I mean, it is outrageous. It is offensive. And I think you get up every morning and say, how do we go after women's rights today? How do we attack the LGBTQ community today? And by the way, those are human rights issues. Those are human rights issues. Women's reproductive health care is a human rights issue, whether you want to admit it or not. LGBTQ plus issues are human rights issues. Climate change is a human rights and a national security issue as well. And again, these partisan bills that are loaded up with MAGA priorities to get a partisan vote, I mean, it is a waste of time. I guess, again, maybe it's good fundraising for the Republican base, but it's like, this is not the way this place is supposed to work. And it really is disheartening. So, yeah, I could ask a 1,000 questions, but on what? On bills that are not going to ever be signed into law the way they are written. They're going to have to be dramatically and drastically changed. And by doing it this way means that, you know, we will probably get either a temporary short-term spending bill, and then if we get to a long-term spending bill, there'll be really no thoughtful and meaningful discussion to make sure we're getting it all right, because we'll be all rushed to the very, very end. But I got to tell you, things really need to change, and I would tell my friends this appropriations process is not the way we should do business here. And again, and some of the things that you feel you have to include, they're offensive. They really are offensive. And so I thank everybody for being here, but I'll spare you any questions, and I'll yield back my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each of you for taking the time to come and address this. You know, it's interesting on my friends on the other side of the aisle, and I'm talking about cultural wars being fought. I want to commend you for cutting things that should have been cut out of this time of day, out of your budget. And I guess it's cultural wars for the little 12-year-old girl that got murdered under a bridge yesterday. I guess it's cultural wars to be against what happened to Lakeland Riley by illegals. I guess it's cultural wars to object to the invasion at our border for the killings that are taking place every day. The 12-year-old girl happened, I think it was yesterday, by two Venezuelans that were in this country. One, I think, was in May, and one was in March. It's as an atrocity what this administration is doing to this country. And so I appreciate, Mr. Amadei, the $600 million for the wall, resuming the wall, which is the only way to really to handle this. The 200 agents that you're hiring. Can you go into how you're going to, what the thought process is on putting some things in place for the Biden administration to make them follow? And I realize, yeah, he's going, if it sees the light of day, he's going to be against it. He's against everything that's pro-American. So would you go over that, Mr. Amadei? Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, through you to the gentleman from South Carolina. I think we're all up here a product of our experiences, and our experiences in terms of border issues over the last 3 years should have instructed people on both sides. And so when we had ICE, when we had the Border Patrol, when we had those agencies, CISA, all those folks in front of us, and people on both sides got to question them, we were looking for stuff that wasn't working, and looking for stuff that there was some history that said did work. And so from that testimony, you can attribute it to whatever you want, but I'll just tell you that testimony informed the committee's work product on what we're doing now is not working. And that's as nice as I can say it. And that was the opinion of the obviously the majority of the committee, and so we tried to put the funding in those areas that we believed were proven, time-proven methods of controlling flow in some sort of a manner that complied with regulations and rules for entering the country. And so that's where you see we put our money where our mouth was in terms of solutions for the border that are different than what's going on right now.
How about address HB2Bs, increasing that? I'm from South Carolina. We're a manufacturing, textile manufacturing state. We're heavy in the hospitality industry. Do you realize this number of the HB2Bs hadn't been increased for 34 years? And we've got empty tables that are not being used. Taxes aren't being collected on food sold because they can't get waiters. They can't get the processing there. Give me a flavor of what went into that, increasing that.
Well, it wasn't the first time that it's been in front of the committee. As you probably know, Dr. Harris from Maryland, who has a bit of an industry floating around there associated with the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic coast and that sort of thing with the seafood industry, offered it. Pedigree from Maine, strong voice for the hospitality industry and in what's going on up in the northeast corner of the country. You've got Mr. Westerman, forest workers. I mean, there's a cross-section that is, God forbid, bipartisan that supports this. The biggest challenge that it has is when you talk about immigration is, well, is that really in Homeland's jurisdiction? And so the judiciary members have a concern about that. There's an outfit out there, Numbers USA, that has a concern about it. They didn't make any effort to contact me, not that that's magic, but it's like, well, these are jobs that other people could have, and it's like, listen, if I've missed some data on that, I'd be happy to look at it and acknowledge that. I can just tell you that it went before the committee. The committee was fine in their markup. It went before the full committee, and the full committee supported it. And, you know, I would be scared because I would venture to say that there's a fair element of bipartisan support for that. So we'll see what this committee does. But if it gets to the floor, unless there's somebody who's got some impassioned, factual basis for saying this is why this is bad policy, I think people that need temporary workers in accordance with the rule setup deserve a shot. And so all it really does is say, this is the number, and it makes you do that number, whatever the existing number is. So it's not discretionary, you know that for sure. So it's not like, hey, we're gonna double the number of visas or anything else like that, but it is gonna say, and by the way, the last few years, that number has been issued. And so it just says you will instead of you may, is the general effect for the number of visas. But
And I've heard from the numbers group, and they can't back up anything that, any objection to it. This isn't, what Biden is doing is illegally letting anyone and everybody with a criminal record in this country. What the HB2B visas do is they have strict guidelines. These people are coming to work. For that peach farmer who's got to get the peaches out of his field, for that, for farmers at every process need workers. So, and again, it hadn't been increased since 1990. Anyway, thank you all for your work, and Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Diaz-Balart and Ranking Member Lee, I want to thank you for coming to testify today on the State and Foreign Operations Bill. Chairman Diaz-Balart, I want to start by particularly thanking you and your team for including report language related to Turks and Caicos in this process. The report language states, the committee has growing concerns about conditions and due process terms under which United States citizens have been detained and processed for alleged violations of Turks and Caicos Islands law. The committee directs the Secretary of State to prioritize engaging with the government of Turks and Caicos Islands to seek positive resolutions on such cases. Not later than 90 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the Secretary of State is directed to submit a report to the Committee on Appropriations on efforts to release detained United States citizens, as well as an update on how the Department of State is advocating for policy modifications on such matters with the government of Turks and Caicos Islands. As you and your staff very well know, myself and other members of this committee and of our conference have had constituents caught up in the legal system on the island and have been detained, some for many weeks at a time, some for months. The treatment of Americans on the island of Turks and Caicos of recent months has been awful. And we've also seen a tremendous lack of support from the Department of State that has been unacceptable. So to the chairman, Diaz-Balart, I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to ensure for both those Americans who have been detained and those who've come home, is it your intention that we can continue to work together to make sure that no other American has to suffer what too many have already suffered on the islands of Turks and Caicos?
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Thank you. Actually, thank you for those kind of words. But this language is in there because of your efforts. You and again, committee member Guy Rushenthaler, who's also an appropriator. This has been one of the most frustrating things to deal with. And I just am in gratitude for your leadership, for you not backing down. We learned because of you and because of Guy Rushenthaler that the Department of State, frankly, hadn't even visited these folks for a long, long time. They were slow at best. And so, again, I thank you for those words, but with all due respect, let me throw those back at you, because we owe you and Guy Rushenthaler so much. And those constituent of yours who have been going through this, I'm sure they're aware of your efforts, because none of this would be possible without you. We have that report language, but that's, again, we just want to make sure that we do not forget about this, that it's got to come back to us. I feel pretty confident, by the way, that you're going to see some good changes taking place, but none of this would happen without your leadership, your steadfast, just absolutely brilliant and steadfast leadership. And again, I do have to mention our appropriator colleague, who's also a member of your committee.
Well, thank you for your attention, and I appreciate you sending that back to me. It's great to be able to work together on this. What happened was dreadful and unfortunate. I hope it never happens again, and certainly Mr. Rushenthaler and I, and with the help of you and your committee, are committed to making sure that no other Americans suffer, as many have in the past few months. So thank you. And to Chairman Calvert and Ranking Member McCollum, thank you for testifying today. Chairman Calvert, I wanted to thank you and your staff, frankly, all of the staff of the Appropriations Committee and the Rules Committee. This is a season that brings hundreds of amendments on important bills like our defense bill. Our staff do have to shoulder an incredible burden to get these important bills on the floor and process all of these amendments. So I don't want today to pass without thanking both sides for their hard work as we go through this to get the best results on this legislation. Chairman Calvert, I'd like to just ask you briefly about the substance of the bill itself. I know innovation is an important subject for you in particular, and how it relates to small business. Could you just expand briefly on what the bill has done as far as promoting innovation in our defense industrial base?
This is a bipartisan effort with me and the ranking member. DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, is extremely important to where we can move to the next chapter. We need to get small and medium-sized businesses involved in the department. Unfortunately, the bureaucracy within the department sometimes makes that difficult, if not impossible. So this is a step in the right direction, along with AppFit, which is also which has been run by Heidi Hsu. DIU is run by Doug Beck, both two good hires in the department, and moving in the right direction to innovate. We put $1.3 billion in that innovation account. We believe it's going to be used to enhance our military and to make sure that we have the technology to deal with future threats, and quite frankly, our potential enemies are moving very rapidly, so we need to move quicker. And so that's what this is all about.
And to the ranking member, if you would want to make any comment to the same question.
This is something that is joint and is bipartisan on both sides of the aisle. As the chairman mentioned, we have 5 large primes left. The innovation that's happening, whether it's on cybersecurity, whether it's on how we move forward to make sure that our servicemen and women have the right equipment at the right time, needs to happen much faster than it has been happening. And with some of the delays, the Virginia-class submarine, Columbia-class, some of the challenges that we've had with the F-35s, we need to turn outside of the mainframe of the defense industry to solve those problems. But as the chairman pointed out, we also run into contracting that's archaic, that kind of goes back to the way contracts were let during World War II. And that's something that I look forward to working with the chairman on as well. We need to reform our contracting.
Thank you. And additionally, I understand to Chairman Calvert, the bill does a lot of work in the area of counter-narcotics, particularly to combat fentanyl. Could you just expand on the counter-narcotics activities in the bill and how we are supporting this largely National Guard responsibility?
Yes, we plussed up the bill about $242 million above the president's request to $1.14 billion in the bill itself. This is to enhance counterintelligence operations with the National Guard and other activities with the Guard to secure the border from this fentanyl that's coming across the border. I may point out, the base chemicals of fentanyl come from one place, that's from China. Those chemicals are primarily made by the 2 major cartels in Mexico and then distributed in the United States. We've had 100,000 plus opioid deaths, primarily fentanyl, in the United States in the last year and the year before that. And since this opioid epidemic has happened, and this, I call it poison, not because sometimes people inadvertently take this, we've lost more people than we've lost in both World War I and World War II combined. This is a national crisis, and we need to deal with it, and we're looking forward to working with the Guard to make sure that they have the resources to take this on, along working with the Border Patrol and all other elements of government, including the U.S. Treasury, by the way, who needs to get after the money in this. If you take illegal drug activity, illegal farming, illegal fishing, human trafficking, you add it all up, the FBI told me that it goes over $100 billion a year. $100 billion a year, and is going to these criminal elements that's being used against and killing Americans every single day. So thank you for your help.
Well, thank you for your leadership. With that, I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you. And Mr. Scott.
Madam Chair, out of respect for everybody's time, I'm going to pass.
Thank you. I have no questions. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for appearing before us today. The witnesses are excused. Boy, you got it off easy.
If I may, a very quick
Mr.
point.
Chair.
So Congresswoman Barbara Lee and I, Congresswoman Barbara Lee and I probably don't agree on anything. And we have huge disagreements, but we do so civilly. And this is going to be, she's been in front of this committee many times as chair and as ranking member. This will be her last time as either chair or ranking member in front of this committee. And so I just, one of the things that I'm very proud of is that, again, and her and I have had these conversations, we can laugh about it. They're very rarely, you have two people that disagree more than her and I do. But we do it civilly, we do it with respect. And so I think that is a demonstration of what this committee, the Appropriations Committee, can do, should do. And so I just want to let you all know that this will be her last time. And so she's a tough adversary, but one that I've learned to really, really work with well. And so I just wanted to thank you for allowing me that point of personal
Well,
privilege.
thank you, Representative Lee, for testifying today, and thank you. You are excused. You guys got off easy, I think. Without objection, the written testimony of the following members will be included in the record. Mr. Paul Gosar, Mr. Jay Obernolte, Mr. Greg Pence, Mr. John James, Mr. James Moylan, Mr. Brian Mast, Mr. G.T. Thompson, Mr. Clay Higgins. Without objection. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 8752, H.R. 8771, or H.R. 8774? Anyone? Going once, going twice? Seeing none, this closes the hearing for this portion.
Madam-
Oh, I'm sorry.
I want to request unanimous.
Mr. McGovern.
I want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a written statement by Representative Harder in support of his amendments number 280 and 289 to H.R. 8774. And I want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a written statement by Representative Sablan in support of his amendment number 194 to H.R. 8752.
Without objection. We close the hearing portion. Without objection, the committee stands in recess. Subject to the call of the chair.